please raise their hand. I have one first question that I want to direct to Matthew. You mentioned that there are no gastric cancer specific grants, right? And so we're now competing with all the other biomarker grants for other diseases, and as you accurately mentioned, there's still this conception out there that gastric cancer isn't a problem in the United States. So how can this be addressed?
So this one's working, yeah. One way that we would address it from the NCI side is to put out a special grant that's just on gastric cancer. So we used to be able to do this a little bit stronger in the PARs, where it's still the same. It's not set aside money, but it's money that comes out of the standard pool. But now they've told us to go to NOCIs. So the old PAR, the reviewers were set aside. They had a special emphasis panel, and they were able to. We could choose the reviewers or help choose the reviewers. But now they told us to go to NOCIs now, and the reviewers don't look at them. So my comment is for. We could put out a NOCI specifically for gastric cancer and target the same grants I just told, or funding opportunities I told you about, and then we could ask the reviewers to read this NOCI, says that we're interested in this, but they don't likely. So I often tell the applicants to remind the reviewers in your applications, as recommended by the NCI, or as the NCI's interest is, we're doing this. And so it's just you help to remind the reviewers. But on the flip side, I think we need education. You need to educate, we need to educate the population of people that are going to be reviewers, the importance, and papers is probably the easiest way on that.
Let me actually add, very important thing is lobbying. So you guys.
Lobbying who?
Lobby Congress.
Anyone who will listen.
So where the purse strings are, lobby who has the money, where it come from. So
is that Congress? Congress.
Okay. Lobby NCI leadership. The leadership AGA, ACG sitting here, they can have a meeting and have described the priorities for these organizations, what the priorities are. And that raises the level of interest and awareness in their part. I mean, that's what Matt was saying in terms of education, but I think lobbying is very important. I think pancreatic cancer was one of them that was through lobbying. It was through PanCan, and that was very strong advocacy. Organizations, they can play a big role in that in terms of really talking to their congressmen or women, their interest in that, and I mean really pushing the appropriations. As we heard today, how complicated that process is, but I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, you keep asking, it's just persistence. It doesn't really, and Dr. Koh know that process, as we heard that.
So we're on the right path.
Yes.
For many pancreatic cancer, they often start out the applications with pancreatic cancer is a congressionally mandated area of research.
Yeah.
So, and for colon cancer, we have the fight CRC is in Congress's face all the time.
So in terms of gastric cancer, actually, it did get along with that pancreatic cancer. So it was the Recalcitrant Cancer Act that actually allowed any cancer that's less than 50% 5-year survival. So gastric cancer makes the cut in that sense. But the only requirement Congress asked for NCI to really have a meeting, workshop, and tell us the proceedings from that. kind of not really giving any money on the side. But I think that gives us, at least from the program and CIs, from our point of view, we can actually put these announcements, funding announcements, saying that's an important area because of this Recalcitrant Cancer Act.
Anybody else with questions? Because if not, I have one for...
I have one more. Just, I can bring the day full circle for you a little bit.
Yeah.
So Shail Jashah this morning said that the challenges in screening were going to be two. One had to do with getting the right people to, the intended people to be screened. So that goes to guidelines. And then the second was not missing lesions, which goes to gastrointestinal metaplasia and artificial intelligence. So quick for John, and then Doug, comments on guidelines importance in this issue, and then the second is the role of AI as we go forward.
So just listening to the conversation, I think that one of the big areas of healthcare disparities really kind of rings home to me. And certainly there's a greater interest and focus. So framing the question as a healthcare disparity, I think, is a really important aspect, and it's an underserved population in an area of, again, previous lack of focus. And I think that's actually, not just listening to, we're talking about this whole day, I think that's one area that we can really drive it home. It is something that's different about the other kind of cancers that we advocate for.
A comment on, I guess he had a comment on AI and the role of AI?
Yeah.
Well, we're beginning to see AI roll out in the, live, so to speak, for colonoscopy. And I think we'll see the same in the stomach very soon. There's already one product on the market. So in addition, that goes in parallel with some of the newer imaging technologies that may be out as soon as 2023 that are game changers for the stomach, because we've always been handcuffed with white light endoscopy.
And then bumping up the quality indicators on endoscopy too, so people are taking the appropriate amount of time and know what they're looking for, will be a big step. And we can automate that, and we can set up benchmarks and report cards like we've done for colon cancer screening.
So one more thing for...
Real quick on the AI part. Again, the numbers are large. So, and in fact, the numbers get much larger when you go into, trying to validate an AI study. So we need large number of people. And one thing we're doing in the pancreatic cancer is we're using federated learning studies, because the individuals don't want to share their images. So what they're doing is they're going to share the algorithms to define the product. So think about this when you put together these AI type studies or imaging, that if someone else has got an algorithm, you can join in and share their algorithm and use your data without having to share the data.
Thanks.
Matt, where did these images sit? On some NCI website? Or?
Right now they're at the JPL, which is an EDRN website. They will probably move into an NCI. And
how many pancreatic cancer images do you have?
They're from 12,000 patients now. So, yeah, but this is 3 to 5 years with 8 or 10 sites we're working at. So it's adding up.
Question for John. He joked that we fight a lot, and we actually do. We have some disagreements regarding how the AGA makes their recommendations, and I don't know if a lot of people know the history on the GIM guidelines, but so unfortunately I played a role in a different guideline, so I knew exactly how the process works. And so they put out initial recommendations and they allow public comment. And the initial public comment, or the initial draft, was actually I thought it had potential to do a lot of harm, because the initial recommendation on intestinal metaplasia was the AGA suggests against surveillance of intestinal metaplasia, period, without any caveats whatsoever. And I didn't feel that the data suggested that. Not only that, they looked at none of the Asian data, right? And when I specifically asked why wasn't the Asian data looked at, the Asian data doesn't mention intestinal metaplasia because they don't biopsy usually, right? So this is where I think an absence of data does not, like you said, an absence of data doesn't mean that there isn't an effect. And this was one where the USPSTF, I think, would have come up with an I recommendation, right? Because there just wasn't enough data. But the recommendation that came out was a negative recommendation, right? It was more like a D.
Well, I would say that so the way that, first of all, the public comment period worked. I think that was important. Let's say the good parts, right? So the good part is that your voice was heard. Actually, was really important. The second part, though, is that the way that they're worded, you could have easily have just said the AGA suggests surveillance among people who are at high risk, given their preferences for harms and benefits and their patient preferences. They could have easily said that.
Right.
And so that was a part that I think that we were in agreement about, and the question is how best to phrase it, but it all ended up on the PICO, right? So that's why I kept saying that first question you ask really determines what your recommendation will be. In retrospect, we would have said, first of all, in high-risk groups, right? And then
Right.
go on, right? And then instead of saying in the population at large, oh, no, but in high-risk groups, here's a conditional part. Again, I'm going to reiterate myself, is that it's the question you ask is so critical, and when we're developing these things, and I got to say, that was a mistake, right? We should have gone through and said in high-risk groups, what is actual? And so I think those are the things that we can learn upon.
So Doug,
going
in the
forward.
ACG guidelines,
Well,
is
yeah,
that what you're asking?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, Doug was involved in that process, but again, he was hamstringed because, again, the PICO that was done was on total populations, right? I'm not going to blame him because he was evaluating the evidence and had to, but hopefully as we go forward, and these are living documents, they're not meant to be one and done. These are updated regularly, so there's still really a lot of activity there, and I still believe that they're consistent. In fact, if you're in a high-risk group, you should do surveillance. I think
Right.
they both say that. Or are the both of the guidelines?
Now, that's a great comment, but I do want to emphasize that I think the two guidelines are well, the pending ACG guidelines and the AGA guidelines are complementary. Again, the AGA guidelines had a narrow set of PICOs and a very deep dive in the data that served as a platform for a lot of global literature and certainly U.S. literature. But the ACG guidelines will be broader PICOs and very clinically focused.
Fantastic. I think people are getting tired. It's 5 o'clock and you guys are thirsty. So at this point, we'll conclude the first day. Another round of applause for the speakers and the moderator.